Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast. It is me, Joey P, Joe Pizzapia, and it's that time again. It's Wednesday, and it means we have to look at the rankings for Week 14. Buy-Mageddon 2.0 is here. It's upon us. It's brutal. We hate it. And, of course, it's awful timing, isn't it? We're just about to hit our fantasy playoffs. And, look, you're taking away all of our players? What kind of cruel mistress is fantasy football? I don't know, but we're going to try our best to circumnavigate what is left and come all the way back around and get all those lineups set. And we are going to do that today with my good friend, Pat Fitzmaurice. He is going to join us, as always, on Wednesday because he has no choice. This is his job. But our other friend here, he's here from Fantrax, Mick Ciallela, and I like to say it like that. In fact, I think I have to say it like that in order for it to sound as Italian as possibly can. And from a Pizzapia to a Cialella, that's pretty much what we got to do. So, Mick, I'm going to start here at the top with you. I want to press the guest. I have a question for you. Zonovan Knight, coming off a pretty impressive outing there. Head coach Robert Saleh says he's not going anywhere whenever Michael Carter returns to the lineup. What do you think of Zonovan Knight hitting the BAM at the right time for the New York Jets?
Well, I love it as a Jets fan. I love it as a fantasy manager. BAM is definitely the go-to guy right now. And, I heard that news this morning from Saleh, and I probably will bump Knight up a little bit in my rankings. As of now, I have him a little bit low. I have him at 30 compared to the ECR, and I'll probably have to bump him up into the RB2 range because if he is going to get a lot of the touches, even with Carter and Johnson in the lineup, then you're going to have to play him.
Has this been like a wonderful season for you as a Jet fan too? Have you enjoyed this? Like, I feel like you're really enjoying this. The Jet fans are finally feeling good again.
So here's the thing. I can enjoy it any day other than game day. Like before the season, I thought they were going to win 6 or 7 games. But Sunday, I was miserable, even though they lost, on the road to a 9-2 game,
right,
in a game they should have lost, theoretically. But I was just inconsolable Sunday night. So other than game days, I'm very much enjoying this season. But on game days, it's a bear.
All right, fair enough. You got to live in the now. You got to enjoy those moments when you have it.
I know.
The Zach Wilson benching, turning the whole franchise around. All right, let's turn this show back around and let's get it to the guys where we have differences of opinion. At the running back position, we have Jeffrey Wilson Jr. Pat, you are higher than Mick is on Jeff Wilson this week. Not by much. Again, 1 spot difference. ECR is kind of right there. But I want to talk about Jeffrey Wilson here for a moment if I can. What are your thoughts going into this week? We know Tua is dealing with an injury, so he's going to play. It feels like that's the way things are trending. But I think there's a little uncertainty in the market when it comes to this Miami offense. Obviously, when Tua is not 100%. And at this point, Jeffrey Wilson, obviously, we have some question about his limited 3 opportunities last week as well.
Yeah, not only we had this great revenge game set up last week, Joe. Wilson going back to face the team, not only an old team, but a team he had played for like just over a month earlier. And he had 1 carry for 3 yards and 2 uncaught targets. So, yeah, that was quite a swerve on us because Wilson had basically operated as the lead running back ever since the trade that brought him to Miami. And then it was Mostert last week kind of operating as the lead guy. So what are we to believe here? I guess the good thing is that even if you are worried about the usage, you get Wilson in a good matchup against the Chargers. He doesn't necessarily need 20 touches with the Chargers giving up the 3rd most fantasy points to running backs. They're giving up 134.9 rushing yards per game to running backs, and they've given up 15 touchdowns to running backs in 12 games. So, even if we get this sort of vague usage where it's 50-50 or maybe it's 60-40 Mostert again, I think it can work, which is why I've got Wilson as like a mid-range RB2. But, after getting these 60%, 61% snap shares, seeing him go to 39% last week was sort of alarming.
All right, Mick, over to you. Could be a lot of factors in here. The familiarity between the 2 coaches last week, certainly understanding each other's tendencies. Could also just be the health as well of last time we saw Wilson. He was dealing with an injury issue. And as Pat pointed out, too, this matchup against the Chargers is really tantalizing. So what's your temperature when it comes to Jeff Wilson this week?
I do love the matchup. The Chargers are giving up the most yards before contact on average at 1.96. They're giving up 5.6 yards per carry to running backs. No other team allows more than 5.12. So the matchup itself is great. But to Pat's point, I'm a little bit wary of what we're going to get. I don't know if it's going to be 8 opportunities, 12 opportunities, 15 opportunities. If I knew for sure he was getting, at least 10 given the matchup, I would say he's a surefire starter. I'm a little bit hesitant. I still have him in that, low RB2 range, but it's going to be tough to put him ahead of some of the higher options just with the uncertainty about his role.
Fair enough there. All right, let's get to the next player on our list to talk about here. And the next one is Rachaad White in a full-blown committee with Leonard Fournette. Yay! Said no one ever about running back committees, at least not in fantasy. Pat, you've got him at RB25. Mick's got him at 31. The ECR is at 22. So very close here in terms of the ECR to Pat. Not so much for you, Mick. I want to get to you in a second, but first, defend the honor of Rachaad White going into this contest this week here for me, Pat, because White's coming off a game against New Orleans here where he was still active, especially in the passing game. 8 targets. That's 17 targets for those of you keeping score at home in the last 2 games. That's what we're looking for. 40-plus yards in both of those for the receiving end, too. He also had 9 carries, had the touchdown this game. So whose backfield is this at the end of the day? Is it just going to be the committee the rest of the year, or do you think Rachaad White is just at this point going to continue to prove to be the better choice for them?
I mean, I think at this point, White is probably the better back, but we saw on Monday that it's probably going to be a straight committee. And, Fournette even getting a little more usage, 48 snaps for him, 33 for White. Even though the touches were pretty even, we did see Fournette kind of work ahead of White. And, right down to the end of the game, Fournette was in for pretty much everything except the game-winning play. White comes in at the last second and, catches that game-winning touchdown pass with 3 seconds left. So, I definitely think ECR is a little too optimistic about Rachaad White. And even though White does seem to have more juice, it's clear that they trust Fournette. But the good thing is, you mentioned how much they were dumping it off, Joe, and with no Tristan Wirfs on the offensive line for the Buccaneers, Brady does not want to get hit. You saw how quickly he was unloading the ball on Monday night. You don't
want to get hit by Bosa this coming week when you're playing San Fran.
No, exactly.
And Pat, isn't that kind of that's the point we have to ask ourselves too? You make a great point there with Wirfs. And Mick, if we're talking about game script here potentially for this game too, it doesn't feel like a ground and pound kind of game you want to get into with the 49ers. You want to try to throw the ball on them, or maybe you're even in a spot where, sometimes you're behind this offense. Granted, now with the quarterback situation there, maybe we have to change our opinion of that. But just from the outside looking in those PPR leagues especially, is Rachaad White somebody that maybe we can convince you to rethink your ranking? I don't know.
I definitely prefer him in PPR because of exactly what you mentioned. There's going to be a ton of quick throws. He's not going to want Bosa on his heels, so he's going to want to get rid of the ball quickly. And I think White and Fournette, from a PPR's perspective, are going to be viable. My issue is kind of what Pat mentioned. Fournette played ahead of White. He played 60% of the snaps. He got a fair amount of touches. And as Pat mentioned on the game-winning touchdown, I hate to play the what-if game, but Rachaad White finished last week as the RB14, I believe. If he did not catch that touchdown at the end of the game, he would have been RB38.
Big difference.
So that's a big difference. And, that touchdown could have gone to anybody. And as Pat mentioned, Fournette played most of that drive and was basically subbed out because of his usage. So I'm just a little hesitant as far as putting him as a top 20, 25 back. I think he could be viable as a flex in a PPR situation, but I'm not willing to start him in most formats.
All right, let's go to one more guy here on our list. Let's go to James Cook next. Now, Pat has him at 29, and last night, before Mick went to bed, he did not have him quite this high. Now, Mick slept on it, looked at Pat's ranking, and sort of maybe had a moment of clarity where he's come around to James Cook. So, Pat, let's talk about it a little bit. James Cook was a popular conversation on Monday's podcast, in case you missed it for the waiver wire, everybody. It certainly seems like he's starting to pick up this offense. He's starting to pick up what's going on, and he could be a very big explosive piece for this Buffalo Bills team down the stretch, which also leaned heavily, might I remind everybody, on Devin Singletary this same time last year and rode that all the way in the playoffs and became a much more balanced offense. Pat, what do you see here going forward for James Cook in Week 14 against the Jets?
Yeah, the thing is, last year, Joe, the Bills basically decided they didn't want to play any back but Devin Singletary, and Cook does not have quite that same dynamic. Singletary is here to stay for sure, but Cook did play a season-high 32 snaps last week, and we just have to try to figure out whether that sort of usage is going to stick or whether that was just a mirage. And, I mean, Cook looked really good, and our colleague Derek Brown was tweeting out some stats earlier today about how well Cook has shown in some of the efficiency metrics, the explosive play rates, the yards after contact, some of these other metrics. He's been pretty impressive of late. And, the Bills running backs have a 20.5% target share, 14th highest this week. So Josh Allen is starting to check it down a little bit more than he has in the past. Jets have given up the 11th most receiving yards to running backs. So maybe this sets up well for what we saw from Cook in week 13, which was Josh Allen checking it down against the Patriots defense. And I don't know, maybe Cook might be a better play in certain matchups. Like, the Patriots don't like giving stuff up over the top. So yeah, like the check down stuff made sense. And maybe, the Jets with their ability to get after the quarterback and how good they are in coverage, maybe this sets up pretty well for James Cook too.
All right, Mick, let's talk about it here. There was an 8-spot difference going into this. So Pat had him at 29. Now you got him at 29. ECR a little behind you guys at 31. James Cook shown some flashes here in the explosiveness we talked about. Is this a matchup, in your opinion, where you could exploit that from a fantasy perspective?
I think it is. The Jets have very good cornerbacks, so obviously you're not going to take away Stephon Diggs, but I think there is a narrative that Buffalo will be willing to dump the ball off a little more. My question with Cook is basically, are we going to see what we've seen in week 13 and week 11, or are we going to see what we saw in week 12 when he had 2 touches? So I think that's kind of my hesitance as far as putting him inside the top 25. But again, he's had 6 touches or fewer in 9 of his 12 games. Now, granted, the usage has ticked up mostly in the last 2 or 3 weeks, but it's still not consistent enough to fully trust him. But I am getting on board that he is being utilized more in a more prominent role. And he could be, if we were doing playoff rankings, I would be probably higher on Cook than I am for strictly week 14.
All right, let's flip the script here and talk about the guys that make us higher on the Pat. Before we do, just a quick reminder, everybody, free stuff. Remember, you like free stuff. I know you do. I like free stuff. We all like free stuff. How about a free Christian Watson jersey autographed by Christian Watson himself from our good pals at pristineauction.com? It can be yours. Go to fantasypros.com/contest. Go enter today. All you have to do is go drop a 5-star review of the podcast wherever you get your pods. And we know you get your pods all different spots, but go there, go to Apple. I don't care where it is. You love the show, 5 stars, then go to fantasypros.com/contest and enter, because we want you to be wearing this autographed jersey walking around the house in January. That's what we want. So go take care of it right now. And don't forget, if you want extra entries into the contest, follow us on our social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, where Andrew Erickson's famous, and of course the Twitter machine too. Again, fantasypros.com/contest. That's the place to go for the Christian Watson jersey. The place to go for the guys in the rankings is fantasypros.com/rankings. And by the way, James Conner, Mick, you've got at RB15. Pat's got at 17. The ECR is at 19. So ECR dragging behind both of you guys. Mick, why do you think that is? And why is ECR just plain wrong?
Well, ECR is not factoring in Connor's volume, which is almost second to none. He had 97% of the snaps last game. He had 28 touches in his last game. He's got 71 opportunities in his last 3 games. So, the volume is king in fantasy football, as we all know, and few backs have more of it than Connor does. Now, granted, I played the what if game with Rachaad White and if he didn't catch that touchdown to end Monday Night Football. But in his last game, Connor was a top 5 running back, and he did score a touchdown. Even if he did not score a touchdown, he would have been the RB17. So the volume is enough on its own to put him in that, mid RB2 range. And I think if he gets in the end zone or catches a couple of extra passes in a half PPR format, which he is apt to do, I think he has top 10 potential and is certainly in that, borderline RB1 range.
Mick makes a great point for the volume, not to mention coming off the bye, Pat, where you're a little bit more refreshed as a running back, especially at this stage in the game. Sometimes maybe going against New England after 25 carries and 28 touches, I'd be a little leery of James Conner. But that bye, I feel like really helps that out significantly here. The Patriots are one of these teams that's towards the top third, I'd say, of the league in terms of defense against the run. But this is what they do. They're going to have to continue to feed the ball to James Conner here in this offense. So what do you think about Conner's chances this week of having a good fantasy performance against the Pats?
Yeah, I'm not quite as high as Mick is in the rankings, but I think Mick nailed it with the workhorse usage here. Connor's snap shares in his last 4 games, 71%, 96%, 77%, 97%, 16 targets and 13 catches in his last 4 games. He's the RB11 in fantasy points per game over that stretch, over the last month. So, 20 carries or more in 2 of his last 3 games. This is workhorse usage. And as you said, Joe, he's coming off the bye. So he should be ready for more this week.
I'm going to have a new nickname now going forward, gentlemen. It's the DeAndre Swift Whisperer, because I am. I told everybody last week. I watched with my own eyes on Turkey Day while the short ribs were cooking on the stove there, braising nicely, watching DeAndre Swift and watching him push, and he did not get the touchdown. He scraped his leg. They called it back. But I went, geez, I haven't seen that kind of push in DeAndre Swift, I don't know, since week 1, maybe. That looked pretty good to me. And I felt like it was time to go back into the water again with DeAndre Swift. And boy, oh boy, thank goodness I did, because he had a pretty good week. 14 carries. We haven't seen 14 carries since week 1, where he had 15. In fact, he hasn't had double digits in any other week except weeks 1 and week 13. This week, you get Minnesota here for DeAndre Swift. Let's talk about this here, Mick, because you seem to be drinking my Kool-Aid here. 16, RB, 16 for you. Pat's lagging behind terribly at 19. Unacceptable. And then RB 14, the ECR understands and feels the Joey P narrative here on DeAndre Swift. So let's talk about it here. Is DeAndre Swift back, and why is the answer why? Yes.
I'm with you. It's all about health with Swift. We know he's been limited throughout the season, but as you mentioned, he had 20 opportunities last game, which is the most he's had all season. His snap percentage was the 2nd highest for the year. And, the matchup is good. Detroit's actually favored in this game, as we know, against the Minnesota Vikings, but the Vikings allow the 6th most receptions to opposing running backs and the 3rd most receiving yards to backs. And even with Swift's limitations throughout the season, he has had 3 receptions in 7 of his 9 games. So even when he has been less than full health, he's contributed from a PPR standpoint and a receiving standpoint. But given that he's as close to, healthy as he has been probably since week 1, as you mentioned, I'm willing to ride him, as a high-end RB2, and I think he can get another 15, 16 touches.
All right. Pat Fitzmaurice, we're friends here, but this is a fork in the road for us. It's time to get DeAndre Swift up the rankings. Let's go, buddy. Come on. D Swift is back, isn't he?
Maybe.
We can't get tickets for Taylor Swift, but we can get tickets for DeAndre Swift right now. That's what we can do.
Joe, you mentioned at the top of the show that we've got, Bimageddon 2.0. We had a ton of injuries last week. So all these things really putting pressure on fantasy managers. And the other thing we had was like a lot of us being swerved on backfield situations, like things we thought were assumed, like DeAndre Swift having sort of a part-time role, Jeff Wilson being the lead guy in Miami, the Ravens.
Sorry,
the Ravens.
In my throat there.
The Ravens and Rams kind of swerved us on their running back usage. So man, we've got a lot to deal with here. Yeah, you guys framed this pretty well. I think you make a plausible argument that this was largely due to the ankle and shoulder injuries that Swift was dealing with earlier in the year. But man, I mean, that was like a big bump in usage. A guy who was averaging 5 carries a game since week 2 going into week 13. And all of a sudden he's back to his former usage. So, I mean, I'd like to see that. I think this guy's really good. I think we also know the Lions do like Jamal Williams quite a bit. So it's just, does this new situation for Swift stick, or is it just going to be sort of an oscillating thing based on the vagaries of game script for the rest of the year? I just don't know.
Vagaries of game script. Boy, that was good. That sounds like one of the prequels, that George Lucas is going to write for the prequels before the prequels for Star Wars. That was excellent. All right, let's get to the next guy on the list and the last one here in the RBs, Latavius Murray. I know everyone's super excited about Latavius Murray's 17 for 47 performance last week, but he did catch 4 balls. We are seeing that Cortland Sutton most likely is not going to play this week. He's dealing with an issue. So they're going to get Kansas City this week. This can't be a great thing for game script. But then again, at this point, this offense is rough. Mick, you've got him up very high this week. If I'm seeing this correctly, my eyes don't need to be adjusted. RB 12. Pat's got him at 23. ECR's at 21. What are you seeing behind those glasses of yours that we're not when it comes to the Broncos?
Let me tell you, having Latavius Murray at 12 in December of 2022 feels dirty. I feel like I need another shower. it doesn't feel good. However, as you mentioned, he had 4 receptions last week. He's actually had 4 receptions in 2 of his last 3 games, and he had not had 4 receptions in a game prior to 3 weeks ago since 2019. So he's essentially, and he's also the goal line back, as it were, for Denver, who never seems to reach the end zone. But if and when they do, he is the goal line back. So he has more or less a 3-down role. Like I know, Marlon Mack is there and Mike Boone is there. But Murray's going to get all the work he can handle. And, Kansas City has allowed 7 rushing touchdowns inside the 5. So, again, do I want to bet on Latavius Murray to score a touchdown when Denver's had their woes scoring all season long? It's a tough sell, but the volume itself is going to be there. And if he does happen to, plot his way into the end zone, then I think he could be a top 10 back, top 12 back this week.
All right, Fitz, what's the counter to the Latavius Murray argument?
Well, the Broncos' implied Vegas point total this week is 17, which actually feels
positive or negative?
Positive, which
okay, good.
Feels
you gotta check with those guys sometimes.
Exactly, it feels like the odds makers are being a little generous there since they've averaged 13.8 per game on the season, and Murray has 3 touchdowns in 7 games, and it feels like he's, maybe overperformed expectations based on the scarcity of touchdowns in Denver. I'm just not that crazy about Murray finding the end zone this week. And if he doesn't, he's had under 50 rushing yards in 5 of his 7 games with the Broncos. Mick did mention that he has gotten more receptions lately, but he still hasn't had more than 23 receiving yards in any game this season. I do have some respect for Murray. I picked him up in a couple of leagues where I was pretty desperate at running back, and he's definitely helped me out. So I don't want to diss him.
He's been a plug, that's for sure.
Yeah, but to me, he's more like a lower end RB2 than a borderline running back 1.
You could
RB2.
say it. I know
Exactly.
it's hard to get this. Say it with me. RB12. Mick, I like it. It's bold. Let's go. Let's do it. Let's get to the rankings throwdown where I pick a running back and that I'm higher on than ECR, and Pat tells me why I'm wrong. This is a fun thing we like to do here on the show every single week. Let's go to Samaje Perine. How about a guy that scored 4 touchdowns his last 3 games? How about that? How about a guy who's looked better? All the metrics have been better. We had Kevin Coleman on like a month ago, and he said everybody should be picking up Samaje Perine just in case. Just in case. And you know what? If you listen to him that week before Joe Mixon got hurt, boy, oh boy, did that pay off. Now, I understand Mixon's return is probably imminent, but have they found something here in Samaje Perine? I think so. I've got him ranked 19. He's catching the football. Joe Mixon hasn't been great, and ECR is dragging all the way at 30. It's 11-point difference there in the rankings. Fitz, why am I wrong?
Well, I've got him down at 34, Joe, and I'm assuming that Mixon plays. I don't
myself out. Let me just.
Yeah, when Mixon has been healthy, we haven't seen any inclination for them to divide carries in this backfield. It's pretty much clearly Mixon is the lead guy, and it's change of pace stuff for Perine. Even though, and I can't believe this because I wouldn't have been saying it a year or two ago, I think Perine might be every bit as good as Mixon, if not better. Which is funny because Perine was this very average running back prospect coming out of Oklahoma, and I think it was Oklahoma, right? And Mixon, Oklahoma guy actually too. So yeah, but Mixon was this stud prospect, and Perine just kind of a guy. But man, if I had Perine in running back 1 range last week when Mixon was out, and didn't score a touchdown, but did get almost 150 yards from scrimmage. The dude can ball out, and against the Browns and their run defense, if Mixon isn't around, yes, I want Perine in my lineup. I want him in my DFS lineups. But if Mixon's around, I just can't get overly enthusiastic.
That's fair. A lot of the deeper metrics on Mixon this year have not been great, though, as we've talked about on the show. And I think they found something here in Perine, and maybe Mixon comes back and it's a little bit more Rachaad White, Leonard Fournette looking than it was the way it was earlier, where Mixon was clearly the lead and Perine was just picking up the pieces. I think they found something here. Outside of that one great game for Joe Mixon, he has been Look, he's RB13 on the year. I mean, that's just what he's been. He's been fine. He's not been great. He had one great game. That's about it. Let's get to our listener mailbag where we get your questions in here. FantasyPros.com/chat. Again, free to join, but premium membership gets you access to AMA, stages, and a whole lot more. So, Mick, I'm going to throw a question at you from Sean, who's got an amazing Ron Burgundy avatar, which I'm always a big fan of. Someone who constantly is just reading things there and not paying attention, just reading them out loud. I understand Ron Burgundy's pain. This is right from Sean. He wants to know, start Pacheco or Dameon Pierce in a PPR this week? Which way you going?
I'm leaning towards Dameon Pierce. Again, it feels a little bit off given, Houston is about a 17-point underdog to Dallas. But I think PPR is an important factor in this decision because Pierce has 39 targets on the year. Pacheco has 6. Now, granted, Pacheco has come into his own a little bit more in recent weeks, but he's still not involved in the passing game. And Denver has not allowed a rushing touchdown to a running back since week 8. So if Pacheco doesn't get into the end zone, I don't think he's going to hit enough to outscore Pierce, even in a negative game script for Houston.
All right, there you have it. Pat, are you in agreement with that assessment?
I've got him really close. I've actually got Pacheco a little higher. I think Pierce is probably the better player, and I think Pierce is probably more likely to get the greater number of touches. But man, it's the Chiefs offense versus the Texans offense. That's the big hitch for me. One has,
yeah.
I was just talking about.
Let's not forget the Texans offense against the Cowboys defense. Maybe that's something we should also.
Yeah, I was just talking about implied point totals, Joe. The Chiefs implied point total 26.5. The Texans is 14.5.
There you go. Play the totals, just like that Vegas show that we've been doing here on the fantasy side. Look, these things are important when you're trying to make your fantasy decisions. It's why we started doing that show after the trade show. A trade time goes away. We start pivoting on those Tuesday shows to what Vegas is telling us in fantasy. Look at that. Pat Fitzmaurice, just gold star, linking everything together here. All right. I want to thank our good friend here for joining us today on the program, Mick Cialella, who you can follow over on the Twitter machine at TheMick23. Check out all his great work at Fantrax. Mick, pleasure to have you here as always. That'll do it for us. But the story of the game goes on for Pat Fitzmaurice and Mick. I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, kids.